you're after then. Before we get started, we just need to confirm for those individuals who are online joining us. We have Dr. Joyner. Dr. Gersh, is that you?
Yes.
All right. And you guys can you hear?
Can hear you.
Perfect. You can hear and be heard. Excellent.
Yes.
All right. So it looks like we're all live. Good. Oh, and Dr. Givens. Hey, you're here too.
Of course. Why
Good.
wouldn't I be?
Here in spirit and in face on screen. I love it. All right. Good deal. Well, show, but our public members aren't here. All right. What real quick? All right. Good morning. It's time to call the meeting of the State Board of Medical Licensure to order. We will be led in an invocation this morning by our Executive Director, Dr. Ken Cleveland, and Dr. Kennard, after that, will lead us in the pledge.
Bow our heads to pray, please. Our Heavenly Father, we come together today and we thank you for this opportunity for us to gather both here in person and for those who are gathering with us remotely. We pray that you will watch over us and that we will have individual thought as well as collective thought, and that it'll be for the good of this state, for the good of the people, and for the good of all those involved. Please watch over us and guide us. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So on our agenda, we had the resolution for Mr. Breland. He's not here right now.
We were just going to read it.
We're going to
into
read
the
it.
record.
Okay. And at this time, I'd like to, before we move on, just to introduce our court reporter, Miss Anna Ruffin. Thank you. So Mr. Breland is not with us, but Mr. Breland has been a member of this board for quite some time. He was actually here when I came. And so we have a resolution of appreciation for him as he has reached the end of his term of service as consumer member. And the resolution reads, whereas Wesley Breland faithfully and conscientiously served the Mississippi State Board of Medical Licensure as a consumer member for 20 years. I didn't come in 20 years. And whereas Mr. Breland served as consumer member of the Mississippi State Board of Medical Licensure throughout his time with the board, and whereas Mr. Breland discharged his duties with firmness, dignity, and compassion, always striving to implement both the spirit and letter of the Mississippi Medical Practice Act, thereby working for the greater benefit of the board and citizens of the state of Mississippi. And whereas during his years of service, Mr. Breland continually and graciously gave his efforts, time, and abilities toward maintaining the highest standard of medical practice for which the state of Mississippi is noted, always respecting the rights of licensees, patients, and others while performing his duties. Therefore, be it resolved that the Mississippi State Board of Medical Licensure, on behalf of the board and the people of the state of Mississippi, by means of this resolution, express to Mr. Breland its gratitude and appreciation for his services during the years he devoted to the board and the state of Mississippi. And be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution be spread upon the minutes of the board and a copy be given to Mr. Breland, expressing to him the highest esteem of the board. Dated this 20th day of March, 2025, and signed by the members of the board and the executive director and team. All right. 20 years is a long time. And anybody sitting on around this table can attest to Mr. Breland's his candor and the way that he always managed to really kind of put things in perspective for us. Sometimes when we would get off into the weeds, I think he really exemplified the true value and purpose of our consumer members, because he always kind of brought us back to the viewpoint of the actual patient, the patient's perspective. And so we really appreciate him and his service, and he will be greatly missed. So at this time, Dr. Cleveland, if we could have the roll call.
Dr. Owens,
Present.
Dr. Lippincott, Dr. Joyner,
Here.
Dr. Dotson, Dr. Loper, Dr. Kennard,
Present.
Dr. Gersh,
Here.
Dr. Givens,
Present.
Dr. Roth,
Present.
Ms. Games. Madam President, you have a quorum.
Thank you. At this time, we'd like to open the floor for any announcements and public comments. And if there are none, then I'd like to also take this time to kind of share with you all something that has transpired since our last meeting. And I'm not going to be using up all the tissues every single board meeting. Y'all got to stop it. But many of you may be aware that since the last time that this board convened together, we lost a member of our board family. Dr. Charlie Miles passed away on February 5th. And so I'm going to try to make it through this memoriam to him. Charlie was a really good friend and also a great confidant and colleague for me. And he was one of the people who helped to usher me onto this board, who helped me to kind of find a sense of belonging. And he was also great for some incredibly off-color jokes, and just he was just a wonderful person. But outside of who I knew him to be, he was also a tremendous physician and a great human being. And I think each and every one of us, if given the opportunity, would have a great Charlie story to tell. But I wanted to share some excerpts from his obituary, from his memorial service, so that you could have an opportunity to have a glimpse of the person who we got to know and call friend. So Dr. Charlie Miles, who was a beloved physician and cherished member of West Point, Mississippi community, passed away on February 5th of 2005. He was if you knew him, he was an Ole Miss guy. He graduated from University High School in Oxford. He attended the University of Mississippi, where he was a member of the Ole Miss marching band. He was a trombone player. Percussion is better than brass, though, but whatever. We used to fuss about that all the time. He attended the University of Mississippi Medical Center, where he earned his MD and completed a residency in obstetrics and gynecology. And if you had an opportunity to know him, he could tell you some incredible war stories about how things were when he trained. And speaking of war stories, after he completed his medical training, he actually enlisted in the U.S. Navy. So he served in the Navy. We had that in common too, because I'm a Navy wife. He achieved the rank of lieutenant commander before receiving his honorable discharge. And after that, he kind of returned to medicine and did so in care in close proximity to the place that he called home. He established a private practice in 1973 in Columbus, Mississippi, and worked there for over 35 years. his impact on Columbus and West Point was definitely far beyond that of just his professional experience. He was also a trusted advisor and friend to many families, and he often provided guidance and support through life's challenges. And we saw him putting the best of those skills that he learned in his life to work even here as a board member. He served on the Board of Medical Licensure for 12 years, and he served a term as president and even had a stint as an interim executive director. Um, and in his leisure time, he was an avid golfer. And in the actual write up, it says that he was known for his quick wit and jovial nature. And so, if at any point in time you happen to hear robust laughter from behind that door, 9 times out of 10, it had something to do with Charlie trying to lighten the load, even when we discussed some very difficult or heavy issues. His wit and humor did leave a lasting impression with everyone he met. And truly, his presence will be deeply missed by all who knew him. He was a gentle giant and is really a person who made an incredible impact on my life. And I miss him every day. So I want to take a minute just in reflection and in memory of our dear friend, Charlie Miles. Thank you. And now we'll hear from our executive director.
All right. Thank you. By the way,
As the ladies in church say, take your time.
I miss Charlie too. Kaylin, you may have to help me out. It's not working today.
You want me to do it for you, Ken? Where's Gerard? Gerard.
Is that okay? Let's see. Am I doing it now or are y'all doing it? Okay. All right. So in January and February, we licensed 72 additional MDs and DOs. That number back from November, December was 39. No new podiatrists and 23 new PAs. Through the compact, we licensed an additional 198, which continues to follow a trend. And then we issued 17 letters of qualification. Certifications to other states was 327. And just to remind everybody, that's where we're telling other states that, yes, this is a licensed physician in the state of Mississippi. In investigations, we received 123 new complaints, 29. We closed 29 cases in the past 2 months. We opened 21 new cases. And so we're running at 44 open cases, which is probably, I know, is one of the lowest numbers in the 7 years I've been here. So, and then we're getting our closed cases within 7 days. We're getting that percentage back up, and it's now at 68%. We requested 31 PMPs. 14 of those required additional investigation. I sent out an email to everybody notifying y'all, but our Medical Practice Act, although it made it further than it's ever made it through the legislative process this year, we ended up dying in the second House committee. We were double referred on the House side. The Senate bill that originally passed out of the Senate, was transmitted to the House, died in the second committee. And that was unfortunate, but like I say, we made it further through the process than we've ever made it. And we'll try to grab all the momentum that we had this session and take it into next year when we will once again introduce an updated Medical Practice Act that this state badly needs. And so I have started trying to include some fun facts for the board members. Our oldest active licensee is 97 years old. His license was issued on June 21st, 1954. We had one that was issued before him, but when we looked him up, he passed away March 27th. And so, no, not, well, it was March 7th. He had just, yeah. And then in the past year, through traditional licensure methods, we issued 654 new MDDO licenses. However, through the compact, we issued 1,100. And this is kind of going back to what I was mentioned as kind of a new trend that we're seeing, is that we're issuing more compact licenses than we are traditional pathway licenses. I expect that to continue, especially it looks like this year the IMLC is going to add California and New York as two of the states that are participating in the IMLC, potentially North Carolina. And we did add Arkansas for sure already. So the number of states continues to grow.
Quick question. Will we, so as we do that, refresh my memory, when they do a compact, they do still pay our license fee, or do they,
Correct.
that's what I thought. So they
So-
pay that, the IMLCC fee, and then they still pay our, so we still get
We get full, technically all of the money starts, they pay the IMLC, the IMLCC, and then the IMLCC takes its application fee off the top and then pays us the full amount that we charge for an application. So same with renewals. And so the other significant part of that is we have grown our number of licensees since the time I've been here, from a little over 9,000 to a little over 15,000. So it's really changed things significantly. But so if there are any other questions, I'll be glad to take them and answer them best I can.
So how do you reconcile that? I mean, I know there are a lot of people who have licenses in other states where they don't live and practice, but we are constantly inundated with, you know, concerns about issues with access to health and our physician shortage. How do we balance that with almost a doubling of our number of licensees over a like less than 7-year period? I mean, some of that's COVID, I know.
Yeah, well, some
But-
of, I think it's the advancements in technology that were rapidly pushed upon us during COVID, kind of a dual thing there with that. And then when you combine that with licensure through the IMLCC, in my mind, that's the reason for the growth. At renewal time each year, we ask everybody to list their primary practice address. So interestingly enough, even though the number of licensees has gone up significantly, the number of licensees that list their primary practice address in Mississippi has not gone up significantly.
I guess the last question that I have is, so what kind of things are you doing nationally, Dr. Cleveland, to represent the state of Mississippi and the Board of Medical Licensure?
Well, thank you, Dr. Owens. So for those of y'all that were not in executive committee this morning, I made the comment that if you give me the opportunity to pat myself on the back, I'm going to take it. So I'm currently the vice chairman of the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact Commission. And that is, hopefully that will lead to being the chairman in the next year, but it's an election and that's not a guarantee. And then I represent us on the board of directors of the Federation of State Medical Boards as well. In addition to that, because of the collaboration between this board and the nursing board and the pharmacy board, the three of us have been invited multiple times to present to the FDA, to FSMB, to different boards to discuss the method that we're using for investigation. It started out with IV hydration clinics, but that has expanded now to weight loss clinics and other type clinics that where everything's not being done correctly all the time. And so we're trying to make sure that it is. And by the collaboration of the three boards, we're able to more successfully investigate those and protect the people of Mississippi.
So, thanks. Yeah, we as members of the Federation of State Medical Boards, we get a chance to see that, but I think it's really important that the public and all the people who get to come and hear the deliberations and the work that we do here also get a chance to know that there's other things that Ken's doing besides trying to wrangle us together and keep us in order and you know, helping to encourage and support his staff. So we are being represented. And I will say that with the exception of when Dr. Frida Bush was the, you know, president of the board, the federation, I don't know that there's been another time when we've had such a national spotlight with Mississippi being represented at the federation level. This is really, and I think that now people are looking for us and expecting to hear from us, which is a little different because when we first showed up, they were just kind of like, oh, hey, welcome. We're like, we've kind of been here. And so it's really been great because they are shining a spotlight on the work that we're doing here and very interested in what's going on in Mississippi. So I think that's just something that people need to know is happening. So that being said, we can move on to the next item on our agenda, which is under tab 7, and that's the approval of the minutes from the January executive committee meeting. So you've had the opportunity. You guys know we've been moving forward at lightning speed with our technology. We got our new fancy sound system. We got this new, you know, video system. We're now working on kind of becoming a little bit more facile with our documents and being responsive to board members' requests about how information is being presented and giving you guys time to be able to review. So we got a new little thing dealt to us this week. We had to do something different. And so hopefully you guys had a chance to look over the documents that were sent. So if you have had a chance to take a look at them, if not, run over them very quickly. If there are any corrections, please let me know. And if not, we can entertain a motion to approve. All right. Dr. Loper doesn't like to use his mic, but there's a motion to accept.
Second, Givens.
So all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? All right. Fantastic. Thank you. Those minutes are approved. We'll move on to tab 8, which is approval for the actual board meeting from January 15th and 16th. That would be behind tab 8. Are there any additions or corrections? Hearing none, we can entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes for the board meeting.
Is there a second? Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Those minutes are approved. Thank you very much. Next, we'll move on to the report of the executive committee meeting from this morning.
Would you like me to do that?
So you can, Dr. Joyner, are you prepared to give that report, or would you like someone in the room to do it?
I am ready.
All right. Well, take it away, Dr. J.
Okay, the executive committee met this morning and considered several things. The first was an investigation into applicant Sakharov for a permanent medical license regarding allegations of misconduct. This was held in executive session pursuant to Mississippi Code 25-41-74D. The decision was to recommend to the board to approve for a permanent medical license. The second item that we considered was a Zoom appearance by Dr. Theodore Feldman, Mississippi license 29,736, and a Zoom appearance by Dr. Randall Kernov, MD, who is the medical director of Cadence Health, Mississippi license 33025. The reason for the appearance of Dr. Feldman and Dr. Kernov is requesting a 2080 and a 75-mile rule exemption. Dr. Feldman was previously approved on September the 13th, 2023, limited to the specific partnership collaboration with Merit Health. Dr. Feldman would like to be added with additional advanced practice RNs into this practice with Merit Health. The decision was to approve Dr. Feldman's request for an exemption of the 2080 rule and 75-mile rule, and adding an additional advanced practice RN, and approve Dr. Randall Kernov request for an exemption of the 2080 rule and 75-mile rule, and adding 2 advanced practice RNs, and approval of an extension to include patients outside of Merit Health. This is referred, of course, to the general board. The third consideration was a Zoom appearance by Joseph Garisco, I believe. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Medical license number 23638. Reason for appearance: Dr. Garisco failed to satisfy the requirements of Part 2605, Chapter 1, Rule 1.1.e of the board's administrative code, because he has not taken a medical proficiency examination or licensure examination within the past 10 years, has not completed the SPEC or COMEX, does not have current certification by the American Board of Medical Services or AOA Specialty Board, American Board of Medical Specialties or AOA Specialty Board, and does not participate in maintenance of certification. The decision was to send to the board recommendation to approve the request for exemption of rule. And these are referred to the board for the board's consideration.
Thank you, Dr. Joyner. So you have heard the report of and the decisions from the executive committee meeting this morning. Any questions at this time, or is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept the executive committee's rulings on each case, all 4.
I'll second that.
All right, it's been moved and properly seconded that the recommendations of the executive committee be accepted. Any discussion? And just for the benefit of those who are new, and even for those who are joining us virtually, if there's a question or if you feel like you need any more information other than what is provided in the report, this is also your opportunity to ask any questions. Hearing none, then let's vote. All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you. At this time, we will move on with our agenda to the report from our Rules and Regs Committee. Dr. Joyner. And you guys should have a copy of a report in front of you. Do y'all have that? Or maybe this is just the agenda.
You ready?
I might just have the paper. Yeah, I'm ready, Dr. Joyner. We're ready when you are.
Okay, the Rules and Regulations Committee met yesterday, March 19th, 2025. Consisted of myself, Dr. Gersh, Dr. Loper, Dr. Lippincott, Dr. Cleveland, Mr. Ledbetter. Ms. Gaines was not in attendance. The proposed changes to regulations basically mirror the changes made in Senate Bill 2873, Medical Record Statute. Changes are as follows. If you look at the rules and regulations recommended, you will notice that there are things that are underlined and there are things that are struck through. It's pretty straightforward. Things that are struck through are removed from the original language. Things that are underlined are added. So in part 2635, chapter 10, release of maintenance, production, and release of medical records. Rule 10.2, medical records, property of licensee. Medical records, it's recommended medical records as defined herein are and shall remain the property of the licensee in whose facility said records are maintained, subject to reasonable access to the information by authorized individual or entities. In the case of employee or contracted licensees, in other words, those lacking authority to manage or maintain medical records, medical records ownership and retention shall be determined by federal and state statute and regulations. Licensees in such relationships shall make reasonable efforts to assure reasonable access to the information by authorized individuals or entities. Further, licensees should inform patients in writing of the procedures for release of records if the licensee is not the custodian of the records. Any questions? New language, Rule 10.3, record retention. Beginning January 1, 2026, medical records for all new patients and any patient seen after January 1, 2022 shall be retained by a licensee in the original, microfilm, or similarly reproduced form for a minimum period of 10 years from the date the patient is last treated, operative word treated, by a licensee. Any questions there? Graphic matter, images, x-ray films, and the like matter that were necessary to produce diagnostic or therapeutic reports shall be retained, preserved, and properly stored by a licensee in the original, microfilmed, or similarly reproduced form for a minimum period of 5 years. 5 years from the date a patient is last treated by the licensee. Such graphic matter, images, x-ray films, and the like shall be retained for a longer period when requested in writing by the patient. Change in language, microfilm or similarly reproduced form for a minimum period of 5 years from the date a patient last treated by the licensee. Such graphic matter, images, x-ray film, and the like shall be retained for a longer period when requested by the patient. Medical records in their original form, microfilm, or similarly reproduced shall be provided upon request to a parent or a guardian of an unemancipated minor under 18 without the permission of such unemancipated minor. I think we all do that now. What that basically says, you can give a child or dependent medical records to the requesting individual. The remainder of the changes were simply housekeeping, renumbering the paragraphs so that they have some kind of order. Patient records must be maintained in accordance with Part 2, 2635, Chapter 10, Maintenance, Production, and Release of Medical Records. Again, struck is the 7 years. This is in Part 2625. Under Part 2640, R1.4, the controlled substances inventory, controlled substance dispensing administration record, and patient record required by these rules must be maintained in accordance with Part 2635, Chapter 10, Maintenance, Production, and Release of Medical Records. Then struck is in the office of the licensee for a period of 7 years. And again, you see repeated 10 years is the new rule, 7 years is the old. Any questions? D, Part 2640, Prescription Guidelines, Controlled Substances, R 1.10. Such logs maintained in the licensee clinic in a readily retrievable manner and be kept in accordance with Part 2635, Chapter 10, Maintenance, Production, and Release of Medical Records. That's the change. Deletion is for at least 7 years after the original record is established. E, closing a physician's practice, policy 3.17. Policy changes do not require a formal APA process with review and approval by the OLRC. That's just information. One major problem that always arises when it becomes necessary to move or close a physician's office is what to do with patient records. Since these are important and confidential documents, they must be, and struck is, carefully preserved in some manner. And added is maintained in accordance with 30 Mississippi Administrative Code, Part 2635, Chapter 10. That is basically the rule we've been going over and over. We're now going to 10 years instead of 7. All of the changes were accepted by the committee. These are recommendations to the board. I want to thank all my committee members, and I want to thank the staff for the work that they've done. And Madam President, there it is.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to open up the floor for any questions related to this. And I will start with my first one, just for clarification, for my understanding before because we will need a motion for this, correct? Okay. So my question is actually goes back to the new language under record retention, which is the third, it's the third paragraph that starts with microfilmed. And the question that I had is that it specifically says such graphic matter, images, x-ray films, and like matter shall be retained for a longer period when requested in writing by the patient. Is there a time limit on that? Like, how is that to be adjudicated or determined? Like, what's reasonable? What is not reasonable? Is there a process that goes, like, if I'm a patient and say I go somewhere and I get an imaging study and I say, well, I know you guys are supposed to keep this for 5 years, but I want you to keep it for 50. Do I just need to send that in writing, and then all of a sudden is the physician then obligated because I've made that request to keep it for 50 years because I asked for it? Or am I reading that wrong?
I think you're reading it right.
Okay.
Paul, do you have any say so on this?
I think you're reading it right, and I think that's exactly the language the legislature used. Hopefully, we will not have to, address that situation. I do believe it would be unusual. Generally speaking, though, you can read a rule of reason into what appears to be a perpetual obligation in a statute. And so if this situation ever arises, I would recommend that the board consider all the factors again. And even if a physician was found not to have complied with the absolute letter of that, again, retention in perpetuity, the board would be able to decide whether or not they found that doctor guilty and whether or not any discipline was imposed. But we stuck as close as we could to the statutory language.
No, I appreciate that. I just wanted to, just for my own understanding, when I saw that was the thing that just jumped out to me, is that a lot of these are, we're talking about timeliness, but then that one seems very broad and very open. And so I just wanted to make sure that I was interpreting that correctly. Any other questions at all? Hearing no questions, is there a motion?
I'll make that motion, Dr. Owens,
What would that motion be, Dr. Loper?
to accept the rules and regulation as presented by Dr. Joyner.
All right, so Dr. Loper has made the motion to accept these changes, or the recommendation of the Rules and Regs Committee to adopt these changes. After this, these are going to go before the OLRC, but policy changes don't. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. Policy changes don't, and just because we do have some board members who are a little newer, this is the first, what we call the first pass. These are proposed rules. They will next be sent to the Secretary of State's office, where they will be published on the Secretary of State's website for 30 days. That's to a public comment period. If the end of the public comment period, if we have not received, that's when we determine whether or not we'll have to have a proceeding, or whether the board can simply get at the May board meeting vote for the second passage. Once that's done, that's when they would go to the OLRC. The policy goes into effect as soon as this board passes it.
Thank you. So I believe that motion was seconded by Dr. Dodson. So the motion is on the floor. Any further discussion?
I'm sorry, did you say the regulations go into effect when the board passes it this time, or when we get it back from the OLRC?
No, sir. The policy about closing the practice,
Okay.
policies don't have to be approved by the OLRC. So again, that's effective when this board votes. But the regulations have to go through the process of publication. You'll have to pass them again at a later meeting. Then they will be presented to the OLRC, and they do not go into effect until after the OLRC has met and issued a resolution approving the rules. We expect that to be sometime toward the end of the year, which is why we put an effective date of January 1st, 2026. that's likely to take, several months.
Dr. Lippincott, the only portion that speaks to a policy change is E. Is that subsection E? That's about the closing of the practice.
And the only change is to make it consistent with the law, the legislation.
That takes it back to the proposed changes from the very beginning. So
I
yeah,
have a question. I have a question that Mr. Barnes may need to answer. Does the policy carry as much weight as a rule and regulation? In other
No,
words, go ahead.
No, it does not.
Okay, it's just a recommendation.
Yes, sir. I mean, I view the board's policies as, perhaps a guide for best practices, what the board expects an ethical, physician to do. However, except in extremely egregious cases, you cannot, you could not charge a physician, a licensee, with violating a policy and discipline them because it has not been approved by the OLRC. So that's the primary difference. You might discuss a violation of policy with a licensee or even chastise them and make them answer to the board, but they could not be formally disciplined for a policy. So no, they do not have the same effect as the regulations, which have gone through the whole process.
Thank you.
any other discussion? So just for the record, the motion that is on the floor is to accept the proposed changes recommended by the Rules and Regs Committee. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. And Dr. Joyner, thanks so much to your group for this. This job is not an easy one. And for you and the support staff that worked on this, congratulations. Because it may seem pretty simple when it's condensed to these 2 pages, but I know there's a lot of brain work that goes into getting that together.
Thank you, and thanks to my committee.
Awesome. All right. So as you all heard Mr. Barnes say, this now is going to go and it'll be posted for public comment. So we'll have the opportunity to review, feedback from the public in response to these proposed changes before the formal process of approval actually takes place. So next we will go to item. Should we hold off on 11 and maybe can we hold off on 11 and maybe go through a couple of these approvals before addressing the issues of item 11 and the investigative subpoenas? I'm just thinking about flow. It might be better to do executive session kind of things and take the other things that we could do here seated together.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. You're
Okay.
in control.
Thanks. All right. So let's hold on 11 and move to item 12, which is Dr. Samuel Shore. And this is under tab 12 in your binders, approval of a consent order. I like to keep Paul on his toes. Can't just go by.
Yeah, actually where to put those executive session matters is actually one of the trickiest parts of the agenda. They seem to be, we bounce them around a good bit. Dr. Shore is a physician who was disciplined by the Virginia Board of Medicine. Dr. Shore is an expert in certain infectious diseases, specifically this case involved Lyme disease. The Virginia Medical Board found that he had improperly diagnosed and improperly treated at least one patient for several years. The consent order that we offered to Dr. Shore mirrors the actions taken by Virginia, which is that his license is reprimanded, and that he be placed on probation for 3 years. The rest of the terms are standard. You've seen them before. There are no additional obligations other than to obey the law and conduct himself as a physician should. Dr. Shore was presented this option in lieu of a formal evidentiary hearing. And as you see, he signed and approved this consent order on February 16th of the year 2025. And so I respectfully request that the board approve this consent order.
So is there a motion?
I make a motion to approve that consent order.
I'll second.
Okay, so it's been moved and properly seconded that we approve this consent order. Is there any discussion?
Is this in Mississippi or is original licensing state?
So it's my understanding that this actually took place in Virginia. Is that incorrect? Yeah.
That is correct. It took place in Virginia, and Virginia disciplined him. We are reciprocating because it was a serious problem with failure to properly diagnose and treat.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? Hearing none, all in favor to approve the consent order?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the consent order is approved. We will move on now to item number 13. Dr. Melanie Woodall, tab 13 again, guys, approval of consent order. Mr. Barnes.
Yes, ma'am. This is essentially a mirror action of action taken by the state of Tennessee. If you look at the order, the Tennessee order, you will notice that it is much more detailed and contains a lot of requirements. This was a prescribing case and involved some important misconduct. Instead of reproducing verbatim the entire Tennessee order and our consent order, the consent order we offered to Dr. Woodall places her on probation. And the first paragraph requires her to comply with all requirements set forth in the aforementioned Tennessee consent order. So just a shorthand way of saying you have to comply with Tennessee. And once she reports and satisfies Tennessee's requirements, provides documentation of that, that would satisfy her requirements to this board. Also, I believe there might have been a fine involved. I'm not sure if I may be mixing that up, but since we have no fining authority, that was not optioned. The Tennessee action took place in January of 2024. This was delayed for a number of months because Dr. Woodall's attorney left a prominent local law firm, and I believe there was some confusion as to who was actually then responsible for representing Dr. Woodall. But eventually Mark Garriga of the Butler Snow firm assumed the representation, and we were able to get this consent order agreed to. But that is why it is so long after the original Tennessee action.
So just a clarification, Paul. So the actual statement talks about the probation for a period of no less than 1 year. Because of this issue, like what's the timeline? I'm just trying to figure out the process. So it would become effective as of today and carry forward, even though it's been some time since the actual event.
It would begin today, and it would last until we receive confirmation from Tennessee that she's satisfied. The Tennessee order specifically last year placed her on probation for a period of no less than 1 year. We have not, to my knowledge, received any documentation showing that she has completed the requirements of the Tennessee order.
So it's just whatever time frame. It could if we get a notice in a week that she's done everything, then we'll take it from there.
That's the way the
Gotcha.
consent order is written.
Okay, just,
Not that I'm aware of, but I would have to check that, Dr. Dodson. I do not want to answer your question incorrectly. We can check that if we want to stick a pin in this and check during the next break. Okay, Mr. Dalton is indicating that she did not practice. It is unrestricted.
any other questions?
So, sorry. It looks like, to your point, and we're trying to figure out the timing, it looks like we would accept time served from January of last year when she gets us the information and then unrestrict her license again.
That is correct. Of course, this board always has the option to decline the consent order as written.
Probation is not considered a restriction on her license. So she will still have an unrestricted license in Mississippi as well. There are hoops that she needs to jump through to complete the Tennessee consent order. And once she completes those items, she will also be able to be released from this consent order.
But her license will be on probation, but probation is not considered a restriction. But if you violate the probation, then you
Then
got a
it
problem.
becomes, yeah,
Okay, so is probation reported to the national?
no,
Just a reprimand is though.
I think that's correct.
That's
correct.
interesting.
Yeah.
The terminology is so interesting. Like reprimand sounds a lot more stringent than probation to me. I don't know. Or less.
We didn't make the rules. We just play by them.
I know.
Yeah, probation does sound. But if you think about it, probation just means you're on thin ice. Reprimand, you've already broken through the ice.
When I think
Yeah.
of reprimand, that's telling my kid, you do it one more time. That probation comes when they do it one more time, they get grounded.
Yeah,
So
you're a
it's-
different kind of
Yeah,
parent.
you're generous.
Yeah, so that's why you're over there on that side
I'm
by
getting
yourself, because the harsher parents are clearly all over on this side. We're over here in a group.
Apparently I'm the last one hanging on. They all gave up.
All right, so yeah, we have, so do we have a motion? Or any further discussion, one of the two guys? What's your pleasure?
I'll make a motion to accept the consent order.
I'll second.
All right, it's been moved and properly seconded that we accept the consent order. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you. Motion carries. Next, moving on, we'll go to tab 14. Dr. Donald, I guess it's Nacelle. And another consent order to consider.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Doctor, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing this right, but Dr. Nacelle. Dr. Nacelle, and pardon me for 1 second while I refresh my recollection. I believe Dr. Nacelle, his problems in Wisconsin related to his failure to properly interpret diagnostic imaging studies involving neck trauma. Those are described in the Wisconsin order that should be in your materials. The penalty that Wisconsin gave him was essentially educationally was reprimanded and required to take courses specifically in the interpretation of neck trauma imaging. The consent order that we have offered him mirrors that. It reprimands his license in Mississippi and again requires him to comply with all requirements of the Wisconsin order. and to present that documentation to the board's compliance officer. And so I'd be happy to answer any questions. If there are none, I would respectfully request that the board approve this consent order.
Paul, just for clarification, and this information is included in the tab, but this was a voluntary reporting? Yes, or was this something that we found out by?
He did report it,
Okay.
yes. We would have gotten a data bank report, and also he did self-report as
Well-
required.
Some people do wait and let you guys get the notice first. So I just wanted to point that out, that this was a self-report as well.
He reported it, he was informed of the Wisconsin action on December 2nd of 2024 and reported it to us on the 4th.
Any questions? Or any motions?
Make a
Make-
motion to accept the consent order.
Second, Givens.
It's been moved and properly seconded that we accept the consent order. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Keeping along with our agenda, hearing in the case of Richard Eugene Cook.
This is a second motion for continuance by Dr. Cook, which as complaint counsel, I do not oppose. And the executive director has agreed that we should not oppose this motion. Dr. Cook's primary basis for this second continuance is that he is currently in a program training for a master's in public health that requires him to be available daily during that training. He resides out of state and he's in that program. That program will be finished by May, and he and his attorney have assured us that he will be present personally in May if this continuance is granted. So he will appear, and that is assuming that we do not reach a resolution by consent order, which there is at least a good chance, a reasonable chance that we will. So I respectfully request the board grant the second continuance based on those representations that Dr. Cook will be available in May.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Any questions or a motion?
Make a motion to accept the continuance.
It's been moved and properly seconded that the motion for continuance be granted. This is the second motion for continuance be granted for Dr. Cook. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, motion carries and continuance is granted. For agenda item 16, which correlates to the corresponding tab, motion for continuance for a hearing in the case of Elise Olson.
I think it's Ellis.
I had a moment where I was like debating and I just chose 50-50.
But I'm not going to take a stab at his middle name. Ingve.
Ingve, I think it's Ingve.
This also, as I know the board loves, is a second motion for continuance. This case relates to telemedicine that Dr. Olson provided into the state of Mississippi for Mississippi patients from the state of Louisiana. Dr. Olson's attorney is Philip Hearn, an attorney who is known to many of you. Mr. Hearn had abdominal surgery a few weeks ago and requested that he be given the additional time to prepare. As he stated, having abdominal surgery kind of put a hitch in it, everything that he was doing. So I do not oppose this, and the executive directors agree we should not oppose it based on Mr. Hearn's recuperation. And therefore, I request that the board grant this second motion for continuance.
So is there a second
I'll
There was
second.
a motion to grant the second request for continuance by Dr. Dotson. I think there was a second by the permissive parent group, represented by Dr. Kennard. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, motion for continuance is granted. All right, going on to tab 17.
I believe that having your attorney get abdominal surgery is something that very few lawyers will actually go to that extent, to get a continuance.
Surely that's not a ploy. If it is, we know that Philip's all in on that one.
Yes,
Um,
yes, ma'am.
So the next item behind tab 17 is a hearing in the case of James Leslie Henderson. A motion for continuance.
This is the first motion for continuance requested by Dr. Henderson's attorney. And it's simply they need additional time to prepare for the hearing. And there are outstanding discovery requests, and we will be making discovery requests to them. So this continuance is certainly justified by the need to have all the information available to the board at the May meeting.
Any questions for Mr. Barnes? Is there a motion?
A second.
It's been moved and properly seconded that the motion for continuance be granted. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? And the motion is granted. Okay. So we've kind of moved through quite a few of our items. We still have our item number 11 about the investigative subpoenas. Mr. Barnes, would it be your pleasure to move forward with the informational purposes piece and kind of get that off the agenda, or would you prefer to go back to? Because if we do the informational purposes, if we can do that now, then we can take care of 11 and 20 in executive session at the same time, possibly.
Yes, ma'am. That seems to be a very reasonable course, because as I believe that the chair is aware, the president is aware, item 18, the hearing in the case of Ms. Resser, that is going to require both open session and executive session proceedings.
Okay, let's go with it.
So would you like me to go forward with the informational purposes?
Yes, please.
All right. I hope I don't mix any of these doctors up. All of these are for informational purposes. They do not require action by the board. Dr. Ali Ahmad from Tupelo was arrested for child exploitation. He is currently residing in the Lee County Correctional Facility or the Sheriff's Department. And his retained attorney, Tony Faris, who had communicated with, offered him the opportunity to surrender his medical license, and he signed a surrender, and that will be published on the board's website. And I apologize that they're not separate agenda items, but a couple of these surrenders came in literally yesterday, the very last minute. Dr. Hyson, was involved in some sexual misconduct, and he lost his license in many states. We offered him the opportunity to surrender his Mississippi license, and he elected to do so. So Dr. Hyson has surrendered his license, and that will be reported on the board's website. Last is Dr. Rurko. Dr. Rurko, this misconduct occurred in Florida. It involved child pornography. Dr. Rurko, also, when we offered him the opportunity, I do not believe the charges have been resolved. I believe he was indicted and charged back during the fall, September, October. However, Dr. Rurko, after some waiting, decided that it was in his best interest to surrender his Mississippi license, and he has done so, and that will be reported on the board's website. Which brings us to item 20, And so as I read it, Madam President, we have agenda item 11, 18, and 20 outstanding. How would you like to proceed?
That's correct. So I think what we can do is, we'll do the investigative subpoenas and, then we'll probably do the, I don't think, so let me ask our AG representative. We will have to do them separately because sometimes when we do them, we can kind of put them together. These will have to be separate, so we might still have to do the dance back and forth, but at least that way we can just do the 2 executive sessions. And then I think that'll probably be around time to recess and
I,
then do the
I
hearing.
believe as long as you do 2 separate motions, you can just stay back there. and
That
do
was
2.
what I was hoping, but
Mhm.
okay.
Yes,
So,
we just have to formally,
gotcha. So we can do that, and that way we don't have to just come back out here to go back. That'd be great. All right, so let's start with, we'll go back and pick up item number 11. So,
Madam
so-
President, I would respectfully request the board entertain a motion to close the meeting, to consider executive session, to consider whether to issue an investigative subpoena.
all right,
At the same time, before the board closes the meeting, I make a second motion to ask the board to close the meeting to consider going into an executive session to discuss agenda item 20, a personnel matter.
so just as a matter of process, I don't know that you can make a motion, but I think you can suggest that we do it.
You're right. And what I meant to say was request that the board entertain a motion.
I'm just kidding.
Thank goodness I can't.
No, so that's all good. I was like, oh, you're gonna go over there and sit by Kennard now? That's great. Okay, so
Dr. Lippincott, are you feeling?
so there's an opportunity at this point before the board to for 2 motions for executive session. One for the investigative subpoenas or to discuss potential approval of investigative subpoenas. Yes.
You need to close the meeting and then the executive session.
Okay, so we'll
Yeah.
just move to close the meeting and then we'll consider whether to go into executive session on 2 separate issues, one being the investigative subpoenas and the others being the personnel matter.
Yes, ma'am.
Now we got it. All right.
Second.
All right. So there's a motion to close the meeting to consider whether to go into executive session on these 2 matters. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you. The meeting is closed.
Yeah, I so move. Aye. Aye.